Okay, so we are live here at the Octavia Butler birthday party. Welcome, everybody. Woohoo! It's birthday party! Yay! So, this was this past week on Monday. Monday was Octavia Butler's actual birthday. And we've been celebrating her all week using the hashtag celebrating Octavia. So if you want to like keep celebrating Octavia or talk about this panel, please use the hashtag celebrating Octavia. Hi, everybody. I'm Kay Tempest Bradford. I am the vice chair of the steering committee of the Carl Brandon Society, which is an organization that is dedicated to making sure that people of color are all up in speculative fiction. And we are also one of the keepers of the Octavia Butler flame. And so that is why we decided we wanted to have this birthday party and we wanted to gather together people who knew Octavia and who loved her so that they could talk about how awesome she was and what they loved about her and what it was like to know her so we could celebrate her. So, to that end, I'm mostly going to step out of the way and I'm going to let these fine people talk. And the first thing I'm going to have them do is I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And I think that we should go alphabetically. Starting from, I don't, you know what? I don't have a brain for alphabetically, so I'm going to start to my left. Nisi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, yeah, I really hate introducing myself, as I've discovered, because I keep forgetting things. I am Nisi Shawl. I have written some novels and short stories, and one of the novels was actually nominated for a Nebula. I mean, it was like a finalist for a Nebula. See, already I'm messing up. And I live in Seattle, and I have a cat. And yeah, I'm on the Carl Brandon Society steering committee too, but I don't have a fancy title. I'm a just regular old agent.
Awesome. Merilee?
I think you just.
No, what? We can hear you, I think. I think you were just talking.
Wow, this isn't a good connection for me. Uh-oh. I better switch to a different Wi-Fi. Hang on.
Okay, we'll have other people introduce. Tananarive, why don't you go?
I'm sorry. Have someone else go first. I'll be there in a second.
Sure, she'll be right back. I am Tananarive Due. I am an author and a lecturer at UCLA. I teach Afrofuturism and Black horror. I also collaborate on screenplays with that handsome gentleman who's in the other panel, Stephen Barnes. We just co-wrote, sorry, honey, I went first. So I'm gonna have to say we just co-wrote an episode of The Twilight Zone called A Small Town, season 2 on CBS All Access, which has a hidden Octavia connection that we can talk about later. And that is who I am.
Awesome. Steve, you want to go next?
Oh, you're muted, darling.
Hi, my name is Steve Barnes. I'm a novelist and television writer and teacher and stuff like that. And it was my honor to know Octavia for many years. So I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to contribute to this.
Awesome. And Sheree? You're muted, though.
Hi, my name is Sheree Renee Thomas. I'm a writer, editor, and poet. I have a new collection called Nine Bar Blues, Stories from an Ancient Future from Third Man Books. And I was at Clarion West, graduate in 1999. I edited 2 World Fantasy Award winning collections, Dark Matter, Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora, and also Dark Fiction. And I'm in Memphis. So greetings from Memphis.
Woohoo! Merilee, are you back with us? I think something is up with Merilee's connection. That's okay. Wait, hold on. There we go. All right, so I just muted them just for now, but hopefully Merilee will deal with the connection issues and be back and join us. And then she could introduce herself when she does. But while we are waiting for that, I want to get started by asking my first question, which should be an easy one, which is, how did you first meet Octavia? Or do you have like some really cool early memory of her? Why don't we start with Sheree? Oh, and you're still muted, Sheree.
Thank you, dear. I keep forgetting. I met her physically at a bookstore, independent bookstore in Harlem, the first time, before I even knew I was going to be doing anything to do with dark matter. But I met her, and I told her I had an ideal, and she was very encouraging. I saw her again at the Beacon Theater in New York. She was there doing a reading with Walter Mosley and Jonathan Lethem. And Mike Sargent of WBAI radio station knew I was working on something that would eventually become dark matter. And I called in to volunteer one day, and he said, "Hey, you don't need to be here at the station. You need to go to the Beacon Theater," which is at the time about maybe 20 blocks from my house, which is not far at all. If you're in New York, it's not too far. And I just literally took my notes and scurried down to the Beacon Theater to hear her read and to hear the others read as well. And I kind of like was talking actually to Betsy Mitchell at the time. And, you know, I just met like all these people at once. So she remembered me in the project, and she pulled out of her purse a Ziploc bag that had her essay in it. That was in, of course, in Bloodchild. And she said that she would support the anthology any way she could. She was really kind and generous there. I was really excited. I felt like all the auspicious occasions, all the good signs, all the synchronicity was in place for something really special. That was my first time like really just being able to sit down and have a good conversation with her. But before I was as a reader. So. And then of course later she was our teacher at Clarion, Clarion West. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, you posted a great picture from that Clarion West class on your Facebook the other day, and I was like, look at all these people, so many shining faces. Yay. So it looks like Merilee has returned. Hooray. So do you want to introduce yourself and then also talk about your first time meeting Octavia?
Yes, sorry about my technical difficulties. So I'm Merilee Heifetz. I'm a literary agent at Writers House, where I've been a literary agent for a very long time. And I represent a number of authors, science fiction, fantasy, different genres, Neil Gaiman. I also do some nonfiction. I have a book coming out in the fall by the head of the Episcopal Church, the Bishop Michael Curry. And I first met Octavia. I was actually trying to figure it out because I thought this question might come up. And I met her because I was the very young agent at Writers House who was interested in science fiction and fantasy. And I was, sent to conventions and things. And at the time, someone else represented Octavia, someone much more senior to me. And, but I was the one who was there. So I sat next to her when she won. I'm pretty sure it was her Hugo for Bloodchild. I'm not 100% sure of that, but the time works out. It was 84. And then I think it was 86 or 87, her agent left the business. And Octavia wrote me a letter saying, I would love it if you would represent me. She didn't say love. She said, she was very formal. She said, I'm writing to ask if you would like to become my agent. Duh, like, yeah. And she said, I don't want to leave Writers House, and I met you, and besides, you bring me good luck. So that was how we actually met. And as that first time I was sitting with her, and she didn't, at first, for the first number of years, she didn't come to New York very often. And and I wasn't going to LA at the time, and so we didn't have that many opportunities to meet until I think she started coming more in like I think '93 when she had her first tour for Parable, and if that works, yes. And then after after the MacArthur, she came a lot more, and so I got to see her more. But we used to talk on the phone, and it was really great to be able to call Octavia Butler and get an earful about politics, science, whatever was going on in the world. And we both listened to NPR in our respective cities, and she was so adamant and so impassioned about all of these things that she cared about, and that she was that later went into her work. So I consider myself enormously fortunate to have known her.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to go next?
Sure, why not? I strongly suspect, my memory is not precise on this, but I suspect I met Octavia in 1978 at IguanaCon in Phoenix. Harlan Ellison introduced me to Chip Delaney there, and I'm pretty sure he introduced me to Octavia there. She would have been very formal. I remember the first couple of times I met her, she was a little distant, slightly distant, but then we were in public at something like a convention. So I'm going to make a guess that the first time I actually spoke to her would have been in a green room at another convention a couple of years later, the first time we actually had a conversation. Then later on, we actually lived a few blocks from each other for a period of time. And so during that period of time, we would get together for dinner and hang out, and she'd walk over, I'd go over there, and I would take her to, she didn't drive, so I would take her to signings or bookstores or stuff like that, and just had a chance to hang out, which was just enormous fun.
Awesome, thanks. Tananarive?
So yes, I just have to say before I go into my Octavia meeting story that I've done a lot of Zooms post-quarantine, and it's very rarely that I feel, oh, I wish this were in person, but I do so wish this were in person, like so many friends and just the energy and all of us loving and remembering Octavia. So big virtual hug to all of us. I met Octavia, I know exactly when it was. It was 1997 at Clark Atlanta University when they had this groundbreaking program. I mean, I had just published one novel. It was called The Between. I was just I felt just lucky to be a writer. So to get an invitation to Clark Atlanta University to appear at a conference called the African American Fantastic Imagination, Explorations in Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. I was the horror, and also Jewel Gomez was there with her Gilda stories. Stephen Barnes was there. I noticed him. Samuel R. Delaney. And Octavia Butler. And I was just this new wide-eyed writer. I still feel wide-eyed most of the time, but I was this new wide-eyed writer. Just, as I said, I felt lucky to have published a book. To be in the company of these pioneers and legends was a little breathtaking. And from what I understand, because Steve and I were kind of sparking a little bit, that Octavia and Samuel R. Delaney, whose friends call him Chip, were kind of giggling about the fact that they could see that we were sparking with each other. So I didn't know we were being discussed behind their backs. But anyway, it was all good fun. And that was when I met her. And just, I was pretty much always tongue-tied around her. So I'm very jealous of everyone else here who knew Octavia, because I feel like of you all, I was the one who was the most tongue-tied, who would, in her presence, would just sort of sit and listen, and I was shy. And often I was with Steve, and they knew each other a long time, so it was just a joy just to hear them talking. And I felt like everything I said was silly. So yeah, my shyness is like one of my biggest regrets, is that I let my shyness get the best of me, and I missed so many opportunities to just dial that number and or write that email address, which I still know by heart, but I was so hesitant to ever reach out to her because I was shy, and I was just convinced that I would be interrupting some form of greatness, some great sentence or scene or something. So I just kept kind of a distance, and I didn't mean it in a you know, in a mean way at all, but I was very shy around her.
Awesome. Well, not awesome, but I'm sorry you were shy. All right, Nisi.
I was probably the last person of this group to meet her. I met Octavia in person in 1999 at the convention Fool's Cap that was held in her honor after I had written the program notes. And I remember I sat down next to her and looked at her and said, "Wow, you're much more beautiful than your photographs." which was not I just kind of blurted it out, right? You know how she affected people. And I was not trying to attempt to flatter her or anything. I just was moved and overwhelmed by her beauty. So yeah, I think she liked me though anyway, even though I must have sounded like the world's biggest brown nose.
I feel like a lot of people might have been intimidated by her a little bit, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, even though some folks may have felt intimidated by her, tell me about your favorite memory of talking with her or hanging out with her or whatever. I don't know, who wants to start? That's a little bit more difficult question.
I'll start with that one because
Okay.
I was so shy. It really stands out. You know, we, for a while in the early 2000s, we started to see a coalescing of what we now see as a huge Afrofuturism community. But at that time, it felt a lot smaller, but steadily growing, right? So there would be these events called like Black to the Future, right? There was like more than one of them. One of them was in Seattle, which may be where this story takes place because Steve and I live 2.5 hours from Seattle in Longview, Washington. So for a very brief period of time, we could just drive up a couple hours and see her. We did that in 2000, where we interviewed her for about an hour, and that's one of my most precious possessions is that recording. And it was probably around that time I had loosened up enough to just sort of make small talk with Octavia, which was a big leap for me. So never mind the politics and all that. We did discuss that in the interview, but in a more informal way, I was always like, ugh. So one time I think we were sort of waiting around for an event to begin, and there's one story I can't tell. It's just personal. I was shocked she said it, but I was like, let's just say that it was a personal taste that we shared, that I had never heard another woman say she also shared that taste. And I was like, wow, well, really? And it was such a surprising thing for her to share with someone who didn't really know her that well. So the one I will share though, which is not quite as personal and embarrassing, is that we both compared our thoughts and frustration on dyeing our hair. Because, you know, as you get older, you get a little bit of gray in the hair. So we talked about that. And I really, as small as that is, I really treasure it because it was one of those times where I was not tongue-tied, where I felt like I was being real in a way that was very difficult for me with Octavia. And it's a small thing, but to me, it's a huge thing.
Oh, that's awesome. Who wants to go next? Nisi.
Yeah, I actually have two favorite memories because I always have two favorite everythings. The first was going to a play with Octavia, and one of the characters' names was Nisi. Not anybody that was actually on stage, but one of the men was mooning over Nisi, and Octavia looked at me and said, "Nisi, what did you do to that man?" Yeah, she loved going to plays. And the other memory is just a more general thing. Octavia was really pretty much an atheist, not even agnostic, an atheist, but she also respected other people's feelings and belief systems. And I practice a West African tradition called Ifa. So I had this ancestor feast and she showed up for it. I invited her and she actually showed up. She stood in a circle with everybody and, said the chants in Yoruba. And, she had brought a beautiful rose bush for us to plant. And she was 100% there because she was Octavia, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Who wants to go next? Sheree.
Yeah, I have a few favorite memories, but one of the ones, obviously being at her, sitting at her feet basically at Clarion was really amazing. Like couldn't even believe that I was in workshop with her because I don't know, I was just overwhelmed, like you said. But the other time that I was really
Sheree, you're cutting in and out, so your connection may be a little meh, just so you know.
Not hearing you, Sheree.
Oh, I think Sheree actually froze. Okay. So just in case that's the case, Merilee, did you want to go next? And then I will text Sheree. Merilee, you're muted.
There we go. Okay, sorry. I think my favorite memory was related to the fact
really
that
excited.
We'd known, I'd known each other.
We all met up at I think it was ReaderCon, and a lot of us went to celebrate.
Hey, Sheree. I think actually that wasn't even really her. That was just Zoom catching up with what she had said before it dropped her. So continue, Merilee.
Okay, sorry. So I'd known her for quite a while before I got married and had my children, and she was always so. She was very, very supportive of my being a mother, and I had a couple of miscarriages before for whatever reason that they didn't know why, but anyway, I had my first child, and she was very happy for me. Anyway, she came to New York shortly after that. I'm pretty sure it was 95, so she was, I guess she was touring for, I don't know what she was touring for. It wasn't a book year. Maybe it was probably for the MacArthur. Anyway, she was in New York, and I had a little reception for her at Writer's House, and my baby was quite new, and my husband brought her, and Octavia wanted to hold her, and she was sitting in the chair and holding this little tiny baby, and she just looked so mesmerized, and it was so touching to me. It was just such a lovely memory.
Oh, that is lovely. Thank you. All right. So while we're waiting for Sheree to come back, Stephen.
My pleasure. In general, I think that there's a category of interactions that I like the most, I hold the most dear. And those are just our relaxed interactions eating. Just, having a meal, her over at our place or us over at hers, whether that was with my first wife, Toni, or with, my good lady wife, Tananarive, once we were living up in Washington. There's also the fact that she was smirking at us at the African, Fantastic Imagination Conference. I wasn't entirely certain why she was smirking until later, and found out it was because she saw something before I saw it. She saw that connection before I did. But and that was delightful. of course. But I wanted to be absolutely certain to mention possibly the single most important conversation I ever had with her. And I've mentioned this before, but she said that there were two things about human beings that frightened her for the future of humanity. She could be somewhat pessimistic about our chances of survival. And she said that the two things that concerned her the most were, first, that human beings tend to be hierarchical in nature, and second, that they tend to place themselves and their tribe highest on that hierarchy. They tend to want to be higher than other people. That she saw that in relationship to primate behavior, and it frightened her. She felt that it was quite possible that that tendency, uncontrolled, would lead us down some truly ugly roads, and already had countless times in the past. So that conversation that night at her house, I believe, was one of the most interesting that I ever had with her.
Yeah, you have talked about that before, and I'm always just like, she was right. I feel like that's a theme of 2020. Octavia was right, as she tried to tell us, and we weren't listening. Instead, we were doing other things. We were on Twitter instead of doing what we should do. So I don't know what happened to Sheree. She may have had to reboot her whole computer, because that is how things are. Computers will break instantly. But okay, so I guess what I want to do, because we're about half an hour into this, is that we have a bunch of people over on YouTube who are probably like having a really good time talking about their own memories of Octavia. But if you have questions for the folks here, you should put them in the chat on YouTube, and somebody will copy and paste them over to the Zoom meeting so that we can read them. But we have a Sheree. Hooray, she's returned. Woohoo! So Sheree, you cut out like almost as soon as you started talking. So why don't you go ahead and restart your story about your favorite memory of Octavia?
Oh, I have a favorite memory. Obviously, it was being at Clarion with her. It was very special. In fact, she moved to Seattle after that Clarion, which was really wonderful. To let you know how much she loved being in that community. But I really enjoyed seeing her again when she was being celebrated. So, of course, I had a chance to before I had a chance to host and do a question and answer interview during the Yari Yari conference at NYU. But I remember seeing her at ReaderCon, I think it was, and she was a guest of honor. And so some of our old workshops gathered from across the country to come and be there with her in Massachusetts. And I brought my daughters, and Andrea Hairston and Alma Patterson, Liz Roberts were there. And it was just amazing to see her surrounded by her fans. I think that's what I just loved, seeing them love on her. And just seeing her being celebrated then was just really great. And just to be able to just wave at her as she was signing books was amazing. And of course, we talked with her and gathered and took pictures with her. But I just loved seeing her in her element. And then the last time I saw her being celebrated like that was right before we lost her, was at City College when she got the Langston Hughes medallion, honor medallion. And we were all crying in the audience because we were just so happy to see her work get the type of love and support and celebration, that she so deserved. And it was just good to be there, just to witness it. I think that was one of my favorites.
Yay, that sounds great. Tananarive wanted to share something else too. Thanks, Sheree.
Yeah, this is, and thank you for that. This is something that really stood out for me as a shy person, and also as an author. For background, when Steve and I interviewed Octavia in the year 2000, she spoke at length about a manuscript she was working on that I may be misremembering the title, The Gift, but it was something to do with a young woman who had a gift, and she was very moved by having won the MacArthur. So she was trying to find a way through fiction to sort of work out this feeling of having this great gift, and then what do you do with it? And then I never heard her mention it again, but I heard from her by phone when she had finished writing Fledgling. And I was very excited that she had written Fledgling, and she was calling me because I guess because it was vampires, and maybe she felt it was kind of traversing into new and nervous making territory. And she asked if I would read it, which of course I was thrilled to read it. And what really stands out for me is that she seemed so shy. Okay, so go back to me, Miss Tongue-Tied, right? For Octavia Butler to seem shy about asking me to read a manuscript, or shy about the manuscript, which itself I knew without even reading it was going to be genius, just really struck me as how humble and modest she was. And I think about that a lot in the wake of so many Octavia celebrations around the country and the world, the Huntington. I mean, I feel like she would just be floored by the response that everyone is having to her work, because she was just a writer. In her mind, she was just a writer doing her calling.
Yeah. Awesome. And Merilee, did you have one more that you wanted to share? Oh, and also you're muted.
Oh, actually, there was a.
Oh, you wanted to answer the question. Okay. Yeah. So
about what?
Our first question is, what did Octavia like to read?
And she was voracious. She owned, as anyone who went into her house knows, enormous numbers of books. But and many, many different kinds of things. The two that she and I discussed were actually vampires. Before she wrote Fledgling, she became very interested, and I represent an author named Laurel K. Hamilton, whose work she really liked. And she'd asked me for some of the books, and I'd sent them to her. And I later saw in her family has her possessions that she had some other ones too. And she talked about wanting to write a vampire book, and it took a while for that book to happen. And of course, what she wrote was nothing like what Laurel wrote, nothing like what anybody wrote. She just brought it, her own, very much her own vision, and explored the serious issues that she always explored in her fiction through that book. But she also read a lot of nonfiction. And one book that actually, I could certainly be very intimidated by her, her intelligence and the amount of books she had read and the breadth of her knowledge. And I never would have deigned to, recommend a book to her. But we'd been talking, it was the 80s. We were talking about AIDS and viruses. And I lived in New York, and I had friends who were suffering from it. And it was a huge thing in my life. And of course, she was incredibly fascinated with this and, cared deeply about what was going on. Anyway, the book and the band Played On had just come out, and I had read it. And for me, it was amazing. It explained it. It gave you an understanding of how viruses worked, which I completely lacked. So I said to her, I think you might like this book. So I sent it to her. And then she thought that I, was so much wiser than I am, and so much better read than I really am. And she would ask me about, do you know any good books about this or this? I'd be like, I wish I did. And I would try to go find out, what the perfect book for Octavia Butler was. And I never achieved that again. But in answer to that question, she just read everything, as far as I could tell.
Anybody else have any specifics they want to share before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'd like to say that Octavia did more than read. She did a huge amount of research, and it went beyond books. I remember when she took a trip up the Amazon to do field research I don't even know if it was connected specific to a particular project. She was extremely interested in biology and animal behavior, and would relate that to human behavior as a part of her understanding of human psychology. So whether it was just, biology in general, or she had something specific that she was trying to do, I was very impressed by the fact that she would go to that extent. And as far as I can determine, she lived in the library, in the downtown library. They named a room for her in the downtown library. It was just a second home to her. And so, yeah, she read everything, but she did more than that. She did original research on subjects. And that's one of the things that made her a great science fiction writer.
I would add that she listened a lot. She got a lot of her information and inspiration from listening to things. Like Merilee, you mentioned her listening to NPR a lot. And she also had books on tape that she listened to because, hey, she was dyslexic. So she had the appetite, and sometimes she had to resort to other means to satisfy it.
Yeah, she also liked to walk, and she would listen to books while she walked, and she was way ahead of her time because there was no Audible. She carried probably, I don't know, I guess a Walkman, the one that you stuck the cassette in. And now, that's what everybody does now. And they didn't call them podcasts, but she would record things from the radio, and she had a whole library of her own cassettes that she had recorded, and she would listen to them.
I just want to say thank you for talking about the research part of Octavia. It's one of the things I remember having deep conversations with her about, because she not only went to the Amazon, but she said she had gone to, she took a Greyhound bus tour across the country to go to Baltimore where she was doing the research for Kindred. And I remember she had I don't know, I guess for screenwriting or was Stephen and Tananarive would know more about that, like a deck or a book that you would have of all your research for the world that you created, for the story. She had all of this research for her, her novels, and that she would just refer to as she was writing, and she could build on that research. And I just thought that just the way that she approached being in the world, was as you all said, it was a full body experience for her, and it was a listening. As Nisi said, it was a listening and a tuning in into information around her that she would just store and use that for her writing. And so that was when you're like, when you go to these classes and things, and you're talking to writers, there's 1,000 craft books out there, right? But you realize that each person creates their own path to, being productive and to getting the words on the page and get them the way they want it. And I just really appreciated her talking about her just being a part of the world and pulling knowledge from all these different sources, even like sitting on the bus and listening to conversations on the bus, as a part of a way of, doing character work, just really thinking about how people operate as families and as units. So that was really cool about her.
Yay. Also, just harkening back, like living in the library and having a room named after you, that's writer goals. This next question is from Merilee, and I don't know if you can answer it, but can you tell us anything about the plan for Parable of the Trickster?
Well, she didn't finish it. And at the moment, there isn't a plan. It's an enormous honor, but it's also, difficult to try to figure out what the best and most respectful ways to bring out her works that were unfinished. When you look at how hard she worked on anything that was going to be published. There are drafts of her manuscripts. She threw out vast amounts of things because she just didn't think they were good enough. And so, it has to be done in context. And right now, there is not a specific plan for that book. But, you know, I talked to her family, her cousin Ernestine Walker, who is the person that I work most closely with, and who is just wonderful. And you know, we'll watch this spot. You know, we'll be certainly announcing things when they're ready. But thank you for that question.
Awesome. I would love to see that. All right. So the next question is, many people are finding ways to celebrate Octavia, hashtag celebrate Octavia, and continue her legacy. What of these celebrations inspires you the most?
I just love that her books are in print and still being read, and that they're being read around the world. I think that is amazing. I will never forget the writer and poet Linda Addison saying that she had to order some of Octavia's books overseas in the UK because they were no longer distributed in the US for some period. And just seeing them being back in print after that, and having introductions by scholars, and having 25th anniversary editions of these books, and beautiful, like the lovely Paul Lewin edition, the double volume that they have out. It's just, I think that's really wonderful. She is beyond just a writer that is in a particular genre. She's beyond a writer just from one particular community. Her work speaks to people around the world, and I think that, and it's intergenerational. You know, the appeal of it has been intergenerational, and I think that's just very inspiring just to see that. Hopefully, to see it on the screen at some point would be wonderful. You know, which is something I know she would be thrilled about. You know, she said she had been optioned before. You know, she's like, I'll take the money, it's fine, but you know, just haven't quite made it to the screen. So we're, you know, lighting candles for that, because I just think it would be introduce her work to even a larger audience. You know.
Yeah, I find it really inspirational that the way that she's being adapted in other media too. The comic books that John Jennings is putting together, the graphic novels, let's call them, and there are films, at least in conception and being worked on. So yeah. And then what? Oh, there's a musical. Yes, right. So all of that. Whenever the written word gets transformed and takes a new place in people's life, that to me is inspirational.
I love the musical. I was going to talk about that, Nisi. It's the Parable of the Sower opera. And Toshi Regan and her mother, Bernice Johnson Regan of Sweet Honey in the Rock, co-wrote it. It's just astounding. I first saw Toshi Regan do some unplugged, you know, singing at a conference at Spelman, and I was looking forward to seeing it for a full year before I got to see it. And it's the last thing I did at UCLA before everything shut down, which is in pure Parable of the Sower fashion. That we had entered, we were like at the door opening into the dystopia right before, right as that concert was being staged at UCLA. And it's hard to even describe how stirring it is. It's loosely the story of Parable of the Sower, but it's mostly expressing the emotions of Parable of the Sower through music. And Don't Let Your Baby Go, Your Baby Go to Olivar is one of my favorite songs. Have You Seen My Father? When I thought about all the people who were losing elders during COVID, or people who were separated from loved ones, that longing and separation and absence is just so well captured in that music. And I'm really, really looking forward to the day, not only when there are full performances again, when people can go out and actually be with each other, but when that soundtrack is more widely available, so that that everybody can get fed with those musical nutrients that are embedded in that fantastic work.
Anyone else?
Just Tananarive, did they have a public talk back when you went to your performance?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Dr. Ayanna Jameson led a Q&A with Toshi Regan. And, you know, and as beautiful as her voice is and as wonderful as her music is, her talkbacks, Toshi's are also just so loving of the work. And that's one thing that kind of stings me, even more so than say the Huntington or anything like that, that she did not live to see the opera.
Yeah. I just want to give a quick shout out to something else that Toshi's doing now, which is she's doing a podcast that is a discussion of parable. And it just started. And if you Google Toshi Regan parable podcast, I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah, she's doing that with Adrienne Marie Brown. And yeah, it's very exciting. We had both of them. Dr. Reverend Monica A. Coleman and I have had a series of free webinars. Basically, Octavia tried to tell us, although as Toshi Regan corrected us, oh, she told us. She didn't try to tell us. She told us. As well, did we hear is the question. But those have been incredibly inspirational. Not just saying that as a co-host, but having Adrienne Marie Brown on and Toshi Regan on and John Jennings and Damian Duffy to talk about their graphic novel and Stephen Barnes on. It's just been like a family reunion in the Octavia universe, which I think hopefully is giving a lot of people sustenance at a time of great difficulty, which I think she was really trying to prepare us for or steer us away from. But if you couldn't avoid it, at least she's helped prepare us for it.
Yeah, and if you're having trouble finding any of the things that were just mentioned, if you go to the Carl Brandon Twitter account, it's just Carl Brandon. We retweeted a bunch of that stuff earlier this week in the Celebrating Octavia hashtag, so you should be able to find that stuff there. Cool. And actually, I want to skip over one of the questions to this last question because it jumps off of what you were just talking about. And the question is, any imaginations about what Octavia would be saying right now, aloud and or in writing, in this moment where a global viral pandemic is meeting a national global racial justice movement?
I think, if I may jump into this, that she would look at this as a convergence of a couple different things. The insanity of an anti-science inclination that seems to be part of the populist movement in America, and the ascendance of Donald Trump, which she would interpret as being, I think, a specific reaction to Barack Obama's presidency and a matter of fear. You know, our tribe is losing power. Let's find someone strong who can win regardless of his personal characteristics. I think she would think it was a perfect storm. And I suspect we would spend a lot of long evenings talking about this. And I think that there would be times that she would feel very depressed about it.
Anyone want to add to that? That was kind of perfect.
I think that given the work that she was trying to do on that last novel, and it was The Parable of the Trickster, and the struggle that she had with finding the solutions, like we moved out of this dystopia, like how do we what's the struggle to build a better place? What does that look like? You're being asked as a creative person to solve a problem that most communities in the world have not been able to successfully solve, or if they have, they haven't been able to maintain it, right? So I think that she might have taken this time, as so many other artists have taken this time right now, to use her art to try to give voice to that spirit of people who are trying to live a better way, who are trying to work together as a community. I think she would be very heartened by all of the coalition building that she's seeing that's happening now in terms of different groups of people that on the streets together that we never really saw together like this before. I think she would have a lot to say about it, and she would be, if not writing essays about it, certainly working through it. And I think it might have even helped her get home with Parable of the Trickster, because it's unfolding right around us right now. And we just have to see our way through through the dark winter, to the other side.
That's such a great point, Sheree. Because I'm thinking it wouldn't have been that she would have jumped into some new responsive work, because she would have sat with it and thought about it. And writing was a long process for her, often. So it wouldn't have been like there wouldn't have been an immediacy. Maybe, I don't know, this is pure speculation, but the idea that she would have been inspired to finish Trickster does kind of ring true. Because that it's what's happening right now all around us is like this huge pattern interrupt, and we're like, it sort of jolts us out of what we thought was into what is. And it's pretty startling, even if you're a bit of a pessimist, and even if you have had your eyes wide open and you've seen the train coming. There were a lot of images we see in 2020 that even the most cynical of us would not, and headlines would not have imagined, that it would be this anti-science, that it would be, like the whole thing about wearing a mask or not, that's not something that they usually show in the movies, for example, and the power of denial and human nature, and how it creates false realities for huge portions of the population. It's also so interesting. And I think she really would have spent a lot of time studying it. But yes, maybe it would have inspired her with the work that she'd already been working on for a while to get past a block, maybe.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say, she wrote The Present 20 years ago. So maybe what she would have been writing now is 20 years from what's going to happen 20 years from now. It was that thing of, if this goes on, then what will happen next? And, she'd probably be looking forward somehow.
Awesome, thank you. So these are the last questions we're going to do, just because we're getting to the end of our time. But someone asked, what writers influenced Octavia, and what writers and artists did she love? Nisi.
I want to say she loved what was coming next. She loved the up and coming writers. She loved you, Sheree. She loved me. She loved all these people that she was encouraging, and she was helping them believe in their own dreams. And that was who she loved. That was, I don't know if they were an influence, but they were her hope.
Anyone else?
All I think I remember is that when Steve and I walked up her walkway that day in 2000 to interview her, she was blasting what I remember is Motown. So I don't know if you remember if it was Motown, Steve, but I was just like, oh, she's listening to music. I was like an Octaviologist, just so fascinated by everything about her. But yeah, but she told us, oh, I write to music. So I know she loved music, and I believe it was Motown that I heard blasting that day.
Music. I know that she loved 50s and 60s era Black music, including, although she was not Christian, including she had some love of gospel music. She enjoyed it. I remember her enjoying Sam Cooke. But other than that, 60s era Motown, yeah.
She also liked science fiction TV.
It is the saddest thing that we have no Octavia Butler TV episodes of things, because that would make me super happy. And I believe we were promised an Octavia Butler connection from Tananarive and Steve talking about their Twilight Zone episode.
Right. So without getting into too many details, CBS All Access just dropped season 2 of The Twilight Zone, produced by Jordan Peele. Steve and I were invited to write an episode. And without giving too much away, because people haven't seen it, and without giving away things that are proprietary information from the pitching process and the development process, we silently dedicated that episode to Octavia. We came this close to making it explicit, but didn't quite get all the way there. But if you know that, just realize as you watch that episode, it's called A Small Town, episode 8, starring Damon Wayans Jr., and it's literally about shaping change. And in both the intro and the outro, Jordan Peele mentions the word change, okay, which is hearkening, in our minds anyway, as we were writing it, to Octavia's famous Earthseed principle: the only lasting truth is change. And that, so it was very much dedicated to Octavia as we were working on it.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. God is change, and that's all there is change. All right. I think we do have time for this one last question because we have 4 minutes, but and I think it's actually a really good one to end on. Do you think Octavia knew how prescient her work was or could become?
Yes.
I think that was the reason that she felt depression at times, that she was afraid she was right.
I think she wanted us to be better as humans. She talked about that explicitly. She wrote about that, like, can we evolve as a species? And the depression may, being around the fact that if you can see things that are clear to you, and you would hope they'd be clear to the powers that be, and yet we're still marching in the wrong direction, and you're using all the gifts that were given to you, that you've worked so hard to sustain and nurture, to try to share some of that insight, and yet you see us still moving down that path. So that, I could see how that could be hard. I could see how that could be very, very hard. But I just keep feeling like I wish she'd been with us longer, so that she could just see how much change her writing has inspired in the world, in so many other people. I mean, I see her imprint everywhere. I see it everywhere. One, because I'm looking for it. So it's kind of like confirmation bias. I'm seeing it. But I mean, I'm just, so many people who might not have been that interested in the genre, who aren't, didn't consider themselves as big readers, they see the passion and the love that people have for Octavia. Someone's handed them a book, or they've seen the work out, and they get into it. And whether it's Wildseed, which is still one of my favorites, or if it's one of the parable books or her short stories, they are hooked, and they are inspired in their own worlds. And I think that's, lots of artists, musicians, performers do that for us. That's the magic of being an artist. But I think that's something that I just, I wanted her to see, it go to the next level, But maybe, who knows? She may be witnessing it. We don't know. I don't know what comes after this, But I think, she definitely has changed the whole way so many of us talk about our work and who is capable. And I mean, Stephen was there, you've been there, all this time as well. And to see you and Tananarive united, bringing this work to to television, Twilight Zone, something that we all, we all love Twilight Zone, and to bring her name, her message, her spirit into that. I think she would just be overwhelmed. I really do. I think she would just love that. You all are you all are Octavia's now. And in that regard, in terms of making the change. But you know that.
And you, my dear. Absolutely. We talked about dark matter that day we were at her house. It had just come out because it was 2000, and it was the first of its type, a collection of Black speculative fiction in one volume. What an achievement. And she was thrilled. She was thrilled about it.
And she said that she had the concept of similar concept years before that she wanted to do with Martin Greenberg, right? And it just wasn't, they didn't have the vision, I guess, in the publishing. They just didn't see who would read it or who would understand it. And so she wasn't able to do it. You just have to wait a little longer.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, one of the things that it shows to me is that no matter how much we feel like we're standing still, we're not standing still. And that's because like we can see like Octavia wanted to, but she couldn't, but somebody that she taught and nurtured could. And somebody that you taught and nurtured is going to do other things. And the people that Nisi teaches and Tananarive teaches and Stephen teaches and the people that Merilee represents are going to keep it moving forward. And I think that that's like the best celebration of Octavia that there can be, is for all of us to just keep moving forward. Yay. So we're at the end of our time, but I want to thank all of you for joining me. Thank you for sharing your stories. It makes me so happy. I'm like over here about to cry now because this was all just really beautiful. Thank you for celebrating Octavia with us. Thank you for like letting all the people who watch this today live and who are going to watch us in the future know just like what kind of wonderful person she was, because I feel like that's just as important as how talented and amazing a writer she was. So thank you for helping me with that, and for joining us. And thank you all the people who are watching now and the people who are going to watch in the future for supporting the Carl Brandon Society by either buying a ticket to this event or donating to us. If you would like to donate and you don't know where to go, you could go to carlbrandon.org. You can learn all about the Carl Brandon Society. You can learn about the Octavia E. Butler Memorial Scholarship, which we give every year to students of color who are attending Clarion and Clarion West workshops. Clarion workshop was where Octavia got her start, and she was a big supporter of the Clarion West workshop, which takes place in Seattle. And that's one of the ways that we're trying to further her legacy, because we want to give other writers of color the opportunities that Octavia got, and that is one of the ways that we do so. So please join us in supporting that, and please keep celebrating Octavia all summer long. Watch all these webinars and listen to the podcasts and buy her books and buy all the books of all the people here who have books. And thank you for joining us. Yay!